Hello, I'm Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, are perceptions catching up with reality? Most Americans now believe women are just as competent, if not more so, than men. This is a key finding from a study by the American Psychological Association. It analyzed changes in several personality traits, competence, compassion and warmth, and agency through public opinion polls. The APA reports in 1946, only 35% of 30,000 adults surveyed believed men and women were equally intelligent. In a similar poll last year, 86% of respondents thought they were equally intelligent. The study cites the increased participation of women in the workforce starting in the 1960s as a reason for the considerable shift in public perception. Still, some gender stereotypes remain firmly rooted. For example, Americans still believe men have more agency than women. Women are still perceived as more sensitive and less ambitious. So, Patrice Onwuka, will this change in perception lead to higher wages and better jobs?
It will, and it already is, and I think it positions women well for the future when automation hits.
Nonsense. Public perception has almost nothing to do with women's wages and jobs. It is sex discrimination and sex stereotyping.
The most important thing when it comes to women's lifelong incomes is their own confidence. So if this does sort of have this reverberating effect of women negotiating better wages, better salaries, or even at an earlier level, committing to more rigorous degree programs that they are clearly capable of achieving, that's a net positive for society.
I actually thought this was really depressing. I didn't know that we had an issue with people viewing women as competent or less competent than men. So I'm kind of grappling and struggling with that, but I agree with the Congresswoman that it's also a larger issue of sex discrimination, especially in the workplace, equal pay.
Well, but if the public perception of Americans is that men have more agency or power, isn't that right? I mean, that's an accurate perception.
That's one stereotype that is right.
Right, okay, but then women are still perceived as less sensitive and less ambitious. Why? You know, there are plenty of women who aren't ambitious or, you know, are more sensitive. You know, but then again, there are men who are less ambitious. Tons of them. I mean, way more than there are ambitious men. But for some reason, that gender never gets tagged with that, with the fact that most of them aren't ambitious because you see, I guess, publicity around all the ones who are. I don't know.
Well, I mean, most people aren't ambitious. If we consider how many people in the country are actually creating jobs or creating wealth, it's a minority. You know, it's maybe 1 out of every 5 Americans, the ones who are responsible for economic growth and for job growth, and a lot of people just inherit jobs that are given to them. And I think that just because you do have Jeff Bezos and you have people who have benefited from a historical legacy of laws and socioeconomic patterns that benefit men, that's been the perception. However, I look forward to a future when little girls in kindergarten don't view themselves as having any less of potential than their male classmates.
I mean, I think what's playing a role here is when we look at the number of women in leadership positions, and we've talked a lot about women as CEOs, but you also have to recognize women enter an age around 25 when they start to make decisions about having families, and they make trade-offs that they're very well aware of between going after a promotion, working long hours, being away from home, traveling a lot, versus maybe a job that's a little more flexible that allows them to be 9 to 5 available to take kids to school. And so I think that all plays a role. But at the end of the day,
I do want to point out, as I always do, that the comparisons about wages put forth by the Bureau of Labor,
the gender pay gap.
Well, no, right, but that it's full-time salaries to full-time salaries. It's not full-time salaries to part-time salaries. So there really is a wage gap imposed on women who are equally ambitious as men, and they're real. It's not just that women are choosing. No, it's not just that.
But when you look,
there are plenty of men who choose to sit home and be couch potatoes and live off God knows whatever.
Yeah, but she was making a point about child care and about women essentially having 2 jobs. They do most of the work of taking care of children, and then increasingly they are workers. That's a kind of burden, if you will forgive me, that will limit your ambition. Whole notion of here's the way up, and what do I do about these other things on the checkboard makes it much more difficult to be an equally ambitious woman.
Well, but is it anymore, Eleanor?
I mean, I don't think
you know a whole.
Well, again, I'm now talking about married women with children. Now, if you're talking about, younger women, if you're talking about single women, I don't see any barriers there.
But the role of male caregivers in this country is also changing, because I understand this
very
second
slowly.
shift, but it's happening. And I think, I'm actually married to a younger man, and even though there's a lot more I feel like that falls on me, and there is a second shift that women have to do, especially professional women, because when you come home, you become a mother. But let me tell you, my husband does a lot more, and things that would have been unheard of or unimaginable in my father's generation. So it's interesting because now we're also viewing men as parents.
Eleanor, it's happening slowly according to the data, but according to the grocery store, I see so many 10 times as many fathers pushing strollers in the grocery store as I did, say, 20 years ago.
And the more women are in the workforce, and in the workforce in jobs equal to men's jobs, the more that's going to be necessary just to keep the family alive.
But let's also, can we talk about the change in the workforce? I mean, when you look at the fact that women started 1,800 businesses each day in 2017 to 2018, and the types of businesses lend themselves well to a lot of flexibility, where you can work from home. So maybe women are not going the CEO route, but they're not. Doesn't mean they're not ambitious.
Yes.
I think we need to change our definition of what ambition looks like.
Well, also that is a key word that you just used, which is flexibility, because working remotely and letting women control our hours. There was actually a really big study done, CNBC did a whole thing on it, about how if you tie women to their desks, they will never be able to win that competition with men. But if you let women just control our own hours, and we need flexible hours more, we can get everything we need to.
See, I agree with the gist of that, but let me add one element, which you yourself brought up. If men start doing half the housework, and we're getting there. It's slow, but we're getting there. And I hope 20 years from now, every new father will do half the housework. Well, that alleviates a lot of that burden on women. You don't really need just for women to stop tying themselves to a computer. You need men to do half the work, which is what Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan were talking about in the 1960s.
Amen, Bonnie.
So
Your thought.
One of the good things about automation here is how much easier it does make working remotely and parenting. When you think about, so if I know my mom spent maybe a dozen hours a week driving me around to and from school, to and from camp, class, whatever. If you have a system like Uber that's rapidly mobilizing to have self-driving cars, no, you probably wouldn't want to put your 8-year-old in, the back seat of a stranger's car. But what about a self-driving car with a lower crash rate than a human driver? That's something that I think a lot of mothers would
all self-driving cars still have to have a person in the driver's seat.
She's saying at some point.
At some point, this isn't something that's 5 years down the line. Maybe it's 15 years down the line. But if we do approach these points where you can secure your children's safety when you are not with them. I mean, we're already seeing it with, iPhones have the Find My Friends locator. If you can make sure that your kids are taken care of when you are not physically there, then we're going to have a lot more space for women who finally, will there be a point when you really can have it all, when you can be a full-time mom and a full-time business person. I'm optimistic at the prospect.
We are out of time. Sorry. Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay or at To the Contrary. From competent women to women running for president. The 6 female candidates and the men running for the Democratic nomination for president are back on the campaign trail following the second round of debates. Healthcare was the #1 topic both nights. Candidates outlined their remedies for fixing America's system. The first night was criticized for not focusing on women's issues enough, but that changed the second night with a question about pay equity towards the end of the debate. Senator Kamala Harris explained her plan to require corporations to post on their websites whether they pay women equally for equal work, and she'd fine them 1% of corporate profits for every 1% difference between what they're paying men and women. Senator Gillibrand had a terse exchange with frontrunner former Vice President Joe Biden about an op-ed he wrote in 1981 on child tax credits for working families. He later pointed to his record on women's issues, including the Violence Against Women Act and his college anti-sexual assault program. Biden continues to lead the field by double digits according to polling averages. Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, Kamala Harris, and Elizabeth Warren are expected to take part in the next round of debates. It's not clear if Gillibrand, Representative Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, and author Marianne Williamson will qualify. So, Congresswoman Norton, did any of those women make a dent in Joe Biden's lead, do you think?
Well, they haven't. Nobody did, and the women didn't succeed in doing it either. But it's not because of women's issues. It's because Biden is more in touch with where the electorate are today. The electorate seem to want somebody who's kind of stable and who is not too far to the left or not too far to the right. And there isn't a lot of that in that group, women or men, and so the women are not faring as well as they might because they're doing very well when it comes to issues, except that it's interesting, but perhaps not unusual, that women are with the frontier issues, and they're carrying those issues almost alone.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. What I heard a lot of is trying to hit Joe Biden on his record, and I think Senator Gillibrand's attack was very scripted, and I think that's why it fell flat. It wouldn't surprise me if she gets knocked out, but that was her Hail Mary pass, and she fumbled it. And as for Senator Tulsi Gabbard, I think it was interesting to see her really hit Kamala Harris. And really hold her accountable. And I did like that she had a great breakout moment and held another front runner accountable.
I was actually shocked to see the numbers, but then I guess we shouldn't be surprised. But I thought that the women did do a good job, combined in both the debates, in making, I feel, Biden, who I like very much personally, and I think he's wonderful, but I feel like he has been shown kind of outdated, old. I think Gillibrand did a good job kind of showing him that he wasn't maybe as pro-women and modern as you would think. And then Harris, the first debate, obviously made him look like he was behind on race issues. But then you see the numbers and you're like, maybe they weren't as effective as they
Well,
appeared.
but also before I get to you, Tiana, Eleanor made a point. That's what makes him popular. It's sort of his old fashionism, if you will. The fact that he's white, the fact that he's an old guy, is appealing to who the Democrats are going to need to appeal to in the general election, but not when the more extreme voters of both parties, so the far left and the Democrats, come out in the primaries. Is that strategy going to work for him?
Well, his electoral strategy, and that's what he's got, appears to be working even in the primaries. The others are on a primary strategy, and that's what's not working for them because Democrats want to get rid of Trump so badly that they're thinking election, they're not thinking primary.
The voters you're talking about.
I'm talking about those numbers which show Biden ahead. And let me say another thing about why Biden's ahead. Biden's ahead because of Obama. Obama remains the most popular politician in the United States. And Biden is from Delaware. Delaware was a segregated state.
Southern state, really.
Southern state.
Considered so in the 60s,
segregated
70s.
schools, segregated public accommodation. So his record spans back to that time. Now, if he had not, in fact, changed his lights, as Delaware has, he never could have been on the ticket, but was on the ticket because he was seen as a conservative or a more conservative Democrat to balance out Obama.
Well, also, as much as I disagreed with the Obama administration's record on foreign policy, he was also placed on that ticket because he had foreign policy experience. You know, I'm not in favor of illegal wars in Libya and Serbia, but so be it. The electorate doesn't seem to care that much. It is important to note, though, in head-to-head matchups, Biden is the only one who beats Trump. And there's that Quinnipiac poll that came out a couple weeks ago that shows Biden could take back Texas. Will Hurd resigning, or he's refused, or he's not running for re-election. Texas is back in play. If you look at how well Beto O'Rourke did, mind you, against Ted Cruz, Texas is in play, and Biden could put it back in play. If you look at the electorates that went for Democrats pivotally in wealthy suburbs in 2018, and the Rust Belt that moved from Obama to Trump country in 2016, Biden can reclaim them both. I think there is something to be said that when all these candidates are talking about, we'll just nationalize 1/5 of the economy with a Medicare for All package, that we can fund maybe 8% of Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax, which is probably unconstitutional, funds about 8% of Medicare for All. Biden is saying 8 years of Obama wasn't so bad. You're going to go ahead and call me a racist? I was the vice president, the sidekick to the most popular politician of the last 30 years, also happened to be black. You want to call him sexist? He was the author of the Violence Against Women Act and also led the Obama administration's initiative against campus sexual assault. So all of these attacks, they were rehearsed. They were rehearsed and they missed. And the reason why I think Tulsi Gabbard stood out so much was that none of that was rehearsed. She had her statistics, she was prepared, but she waited for a moment that seemed genuine. And that's something that I think someone like Amy Klobuchar could have really benefited from. But instead, John Delaney sort of took all the oxygen from that stage by pointing out to Elizabeth Warren, you know, your plan, it will raise taxes. Sure, you'll have less out-of-pocket expenses, but it will raise taxes. If you look at every other country on earth that has that expansive of benefits, this is not a Canadian-style healthcare plan, Medicare for All. This is so much further, and that ultimately will. And so it was someone like Gabbard who was prepared but not rehearsed, did so much better than someone like Harris or like Gillibrand.
Gotcha. Fascinating analysis, but we are out of time. Behind the headlines, according to a new study, Black girls in America are seen as more mature and less deserving of protection than other students. Harmful effects include young Black girls treated more harshly than their white peers.
It really became salient to me when I had my own children. And I would listen to some of the language that their teachers were using or their physician was using to kind of characterize their behavior or their appearance.
Dr. Jamelia Blake is an associate professor in educational psychology at Texas A&M University.
When we talk about children being mature in a positive light, we talk about them being precocious or advanced or gifted. But you know, if one of my daughters or one of their friends was doing something that the teacher believed was advanced age, well, they're too grown. They know too much information.
This attitude is the focus of a study co-authored by Dr. Blake called Listening to Black Women and Girls, Lived Experiences of Adultification Bias.
In the initial study, we found that adults perceive Black girls as more adult-like and less innocent as early as the age of 5 years old. So what we found is, as young as potentially the age of kindergarten, adults, including potentially teachers, could be looking at a Black girl and responding to her as if she's older than she really is.
Rebecca Epstein, executive director at Georgetown University Law Center on Poverty and Inequality, was the other lead on the study.
What that translates into is less leniency, not giving Black girls second chances, not treating them as if they're children, and with the innocence that we typically associate with girls.
Blake and Epstein interviewed Black women of different ages who all shared similar stories of how adultification bias influenced their lives growing up.
What was powerful, though, was that there was a consistency to the stories from our youngest participants, our youngest was 12 years old, to our older participants who are older than the age of 60. So across generations, this is a consistent experience for Black girls.
The roots really come from racism, right? The legacy of slavery and historically us dehumanizing Black people, right? And so this idea that Black children are not really children.
And researchers say this adultification bias results in young Black girls being likely to receive more severe punishment compared with other students.
Black girls are suspended at over 5 times the rate of white girls nationally. And similarly, Black girls are treated more punitively along most of the key decision-making points in the juvenile justice system as well.
Dr. Blake says when she first started noticing this phenomenon affecting her daughters, she didn't know how to respond.
And I don't think at that time, especially when my girls were young, I had that awareness. And when I reflect back, I'm like, that's exactly what was happening, that they were exhibiting this bias.
She hopes this study can serve as a roadmap for parents trying to navigate these biases.
I hope it creates awareness and gives parents and teachers and mental health professionals and social workers some kind of language to begin this conversation, and also to really think critically and reflect on their own perceptions and how they're interpreting behaviors.
So, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, explain this to me? You know, slavery and adultification. Is it because was it white slave owners justifying their raping of 12-year-old black girls, slaves back then? Spell out the link for me.
Well, that link goes back far too far, it seems to me, to be able to be traced to today. And I appreciate the attention to black girls, but I have to say that if you were to compare black boys to white boys, it might not be called adultification, but you would find huge gaps as well. So this comparison of girls to girls, one race to another, is not particularly compelling to me, because it is as expected. I'd want to look, though, closely at the girls, just as I'd look closely at the boys. And by the way, the bigger concern in the African American community is about black boys who are behind black girls in almost every respect. I have a whole commission on black men and boys. So I really want to look with what it is that keeps black girls from feeling fully equal to do what she has to do. I'd look at how she's treated in school. I would forget this thing about home. I'd look with what happens when she comes into the wider world and try to focus there. That's where you can get people treated equally.
I appreciate all of your comments, and I agree with you on so much. I will say that there's a social angle to this, and people will not like what I say when I say this, but we often glorify videos of little girls and babies dancing in frankly sexualized ways because it's cute. But it's not cute, and we're teaching girls about using their bodies.
So it's more cultural.
I think there's a cultural angle to it. It's not entirely that,
white
but I
girls
do think
do that kind of stuff.
They do, but somehow it gets more attached to black girls, maybe because of the body shapes and body types that tend to develop maybe a little bit more. So I think there's a role for us as parents to really be careful about what we consider cute and put out on social media. You know, I think there's a role for parents in this.
There's a big problem across the board of sexualizing of little girls. But I think what's so interesting about this study is because a lot of this came up during the whole R. Kelly scandal. They were saying that the reason he didn't get prosecuted sooner or he wasn't behind bars sooner is because he was doing this with so many underage black girls and that they weren't viewed with the same kind of sympathy.
But if you look at some of his videos, and he's not the only rapper, but I mean rapper videos of black women, to me, it's disgusting what a lot of white musicians do to white women in those videos. But when you see some of, of them with basically not clothed at all and wiggling all parts of their intimates all over the place, and I wonder how much that plays into it.
So per the R. Kelly point, I mean, we are also seeing this with Jeffrey Epstein, who has this, his predilection were for more thin, white, blonde girls. And if we just go back and we look at the media coverage of that case when he got that initial deal, it was described as prostitution. A 14-year-old girl does not have the ability to consent to sex, much less with a millionaire or a billionaire. Yet, I'm not denying that race isn't a component of it, specifically for the reasons that you were saying, with regards to perhaps if a black girl if she develops in puberty earlier, perhaps there are more biases, and of course the legacy of just slavery and racism and justifying the sexual slavery of women is a component. But
quickly, because we have to go.
But could it just be more that as a culture we are willing to turn a blind eye away from victims of people in power, of victims of people like R. Kelly or like Jeffrey Epstein?
All right, that's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the Cornell Douglas Foundation, committed to encouraging stewardship of the environment, land conservation, watershed protection, and eliminating harmful chemicals. Additional funding provided by the Wallace Genetic Foundation, the Colcom Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation. For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary.
Be more PBS.